Chapter 5. Hank had told me that at the time he got married that his Ma Richard, would be coming down for a visit. She was going to get a ride down from Painter Mountain, and she was going to stay for several weeks. I had never met Ma Richard, and I was looking forward to her visit, for I had not seen many women since we moved to Gap Creek. It was getting up toward late fall by then, toward hog killing time. One day, Hank got a letter from his ma, scribbled with a pencil on table paper. Hank, you come up here and get me on a Saturday, it said. I'll be ready. By 10 o'clock. There was the whole letter. How are you going to get her? I said, for Hank didn't even have a horse, much less a buggy or a wagon. He walked to work every day to the mill at Eaton. Mr. Pendergast had an old mare with a bad foot, but Hank doubted if she could make it up the mountain and back. There was an old buggy in the barn, but it was buried under dust and harness and other junk. You're going to have to write your ma and tell her you can't come, I said. She will understand. She is expecting me, Hank said, like there wasn't a choice. We dug the buggy out from under the hay and trash and dusted it off. I got a bucket of warm water and a rag and washed the whole thing. There was a shaft broke, and Tom whittled a new one out of a hickory pole and smoothed it with a piece of glass. He took the wheels off and put grease on the ends of the axles, then replaced a spoke in one of the wheels. Now all you need is a horse, I said. I have a horse, Hank said. He caught Mr. Pendergast's mare out of the pasture and showed me the sore on the right front foot. It was a place with pus coming out right on the frog of her hoof. She'll have to go slow, he said. And besides, I'm going to put a sock on her foot. What do you mean a sock? Hank took a piece of leather and put cotton inside it. Then he tied the leather around the mare's foot. It looked like she had a swelled hoof. I don't expect to be nervous because Miss Richard was coming for a visit, but I was. After Hank left before daylight to go to Painter Mountain, I started thinking of all the stories I'd heard about mothers-in-law. I had heard 100 tales about how mean they was to girls that married their sons, and I never had made a lot of friends with women anyway. All day while I waited for Hank to come back with his mom, I thought about what I was going to say to her and what she would think of my cooking and housekeeping. I had fixed up the bedroom upstairs next to ours, cleared out all the dust and rags and cardboard boxes, and went up to the attic to look for a single bed. Mr. Pendergast said the bed was there, but when I climbed up to the loft, there was such a mess I couldn't see the bed at first. There was fruit jars and old chairs and cobwebs hanging from everything. There was some roof hanging from rafters, and that I thought was ginseng, but everything was covered with dust. When I finally found the little bed, I had to scour it with soap and water and wash the floor in the little bedroom and the one window and hung curtains there. Mr. Pendergast watched me and didn't say much. Since the quarrel with Hank the second night, he had been a little quieter, though he still liked to snap at me from time to time. Someday he didn't get out of the bed until afternoon. When he sat at the table in the kitchen while I was working, he complained that he didn't have no relations but his stepchildren, and they never come to see him. How long has it been since Mrs. Pendergast died? I said. 4 years, Mr. Pendergast said, and I ain't seen my young'un since the funeral. I was not good at waiting for somebody. When I'm waiting, I get flustered and hot and think about all the things that could go wrong. And the more nervous I am, the more I worry and get aggravated. When I'm waiting, time slows down till it mocks me. When I keep waiting for somebody to come, I feel like I'm going to fall to pieces. The only thing to do is not wait at all, but to get on with whatever you're doing. After I fixed up the bedroom for mommy church, I killed the chicken and plucked and dressed it for supper. And while the kitchen was flying, I baked some biscuits and made an apple pie out of northern apples from a tree beside a pasture. I was worried about my cooking because Rosie had always done the cooking at home and never really had learned to cook except when I taught myself. I set the table and Mr. Pendergast came into the kitchen and sat down by the stove. When it got dark, I left the chicken on the stove with the lid on to keep it from drying out, and took the biscuit out of the pan and put a cloth over them to keep them warm. The clock said it was past 6. Maybe they've been killed, Mr. Pendergast said. Bad luck to say such things, I said. I heard the noise outside and ran to the window, but it was somebody else going by a wagon. Won't do no good to watch for them, Mr. Pendergast said. What will do some good, I said. They may have run off the mountain, Mr. Pendergast said. Instead of waiting for his supper, Mr. Pendergast got the jar of molasses and had himself some hot biscuits with butter and molasses. It was one of his favorite things to eat. I just hoped he didn't eat up all the biscuit before Hank and Ma Richard arrived. He always looked forward to people coming, Mr. Pendergast said, then looked forward to their leaving. Finally, it was near 7 o'clock when somebody opened the door, and there was Hank in the lamplight and this little dried up looking woman beside him. Because Hank was a big man, I expected Ma Richard to be big too, but she was built like a banty hen, with black eyes and sharp thin chin. Her head was tied up in a scarf, and she stalked into the room like she was claiming it for her own. I'm cold and I'm so hungry. My backbone was rubbed, a blister on my ribs, she said. She walked around to the kitchen, looking at the shelves and the stove and bread safe. We're mighty proud to have you come, I said. I didn't know whether to hold out my hand or not. She looked at me and said, You're not as tall as I expected. I had just thought how short she was, but I didn't say nothing. This is Mr. Pendergast, Hank said. Mr. Pendergast stopped eating and wiped his hand on his pants, but he was held it out. Ma Richard didn't take it. Are you Pendergast that was run over by a horse? Ma Richard said. That was my brother, Mr. Pendergast said. He's been dead 20 years. Ma ran her fingers along a shaft and then looked to see if there was a dust on it. She lifted the lid of the pan of chicken and steam come out of the pan. Why don't we having something to eat? I said. I'm so cold, I need a cup of coffee, Ma said. It won't take but a minute to boil coffee, I said. Is the beans already ground? Ma said. No, but won't take a second to grind them. I said, if you can wait that long, good. For I don't like stale coffee, Ma said. Ma acted so demanding and uppity. I couldn't hardly believe it. I wanted to tell her she should have brought her own coffee, but I held my tongue. Hank and Ma sat down at the table with Mr. Pendergast. I took a lantern out on the back porch and ground some coffee beans. After I come back in and started the coffee to boiling, I sat down at the table. A woman should always be ready for a guest, Ma Richard said. She put butter and then molasses on a biscuit. She should know what they will need, she said. I'm sorry, I said. I don't know why I said sorry. Why I said I was sorry. It just come out. I guess I was too mad to say how I really felt. I've had everything ready for over an hour. We was late because an axle broke, Hank said. We're lucky we weren't killed, Ma Richard said. She held the spoon up and looked at it in the lamplight. I was glad I had polished all the silver. I had to patch it up with a hickory stick, Hank said. Never been so scared in my life, Ma Richard said. We were on the edge of the cliff when the buggy wheel broke. Where did you get that buggy? It belonged to my pa, Mr. Pendergast said. Are you sure it wasn't your grandpa? Ma Richard said and laughed. Mr. Pendergast laughed with her. After I sat down at the table with Ma Richard at the end where I usually sat, Hank said a longer blessing than usual, and it was more politely said too. Lord, make us truly thankful and worthy, he began. I thought how careful he was around his ma. She was such a tiny woman, and yet Hank acted like a little boy trying to please her. I'm so upset I don't think I have any appetite, Ma Richard said when the blessing was over. I passed her out the platter of chicken and she took a drumstick. She held it up in the lamplight and looked at the crust, which had got damp from waiting so long in the pan. A crust won't stay crisp if there is too much flour on the skin, she said. I was going to say it was waiting so long in the pan that made the crust soggy, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound like I was arguing with Ma Richard. She was not only my mother-in-law, she was my guest, and I was learning to cook. Ma took a biscuit and sliced it. The biscuit had got a little soft from waiting under the cloth also. Ma held the biscuit half up in the lamplight. A biscuit that ain't cooked long enough will never be crisped, she said. I felt my face get hot. Ma Richard was testing me in front of Hank and Mr. Pendergast. I wasn't going to let her get my goat. I passed her the rice and green beans. I passed her the butter and molasses. I seen the coffee was boiling and got up and poured a cup. I asked Mr. Pendergast if he wanted any coffee. Couldn't sleep for a week if I had coffee for supper, he said. Anybody with a clear conscience can sleep, Ma Richard said. Mr. Pendergast started to answer, but then couldn't seem to think of what to say. He couldn't admit his conscience wasn't clear, and he couldn't argue that it was. Ma had made a statement that was unanswerable. I sat down at the table again and helped myself to the rice. Ma Richard took a sip of her coffee like she was testing it. Is this the house where a woman died of TB? She said. That was my wife, Mr. Pendergast said. I heard she was sick a long time, Ma said. 9 on the 3 years. Ma looked around the kitchen like she expected to see Mr. Pendergast still there in one of the dark corners. I hear germs from TB will stay in the house for years, she said. No germs had bothered me, Mr. Pendergast said. What room did she die in? Ma said. She sipped the coffee and took a bite of biscuit and molasses. The front bedroom, Mr. Pendergast said. Where I still asleep. You've been a lucky man, Ma said. She took a bite of her chicken, then put the drumstick back on the plate and spread more molasses on the biscuit. How did your husband die? Mr. Pendergast said. His mouth full of chicken. Richard looked at Mr. Pendergast like he was accusing her of something. She spread the molasses careful and then took a bite of the biscuit. Died sitting on the porch, she said. He was helping me to churn and just pitched forward into the yard. Fell all over the place and the chickens run to pat clever. Die of a stroke, Mr. Pendergast said. Died of a stroke or a heart attack, Mr. Pendergast said. Must have it all wrong, Mr. Pendergast said. He eat what I fixed him, Ma said, which was plain, wholesome fare. I had a warning that Pa was going to die. He said. What kind of warning, Mr. Pendergast said. My brother Ross and me was sitting on the milk gap waiting for Pa to come back from meal. Hank said. It was getting late where the air has got cold in it, and it was time for Pa to be home. We were looking down across the pasture and I seen Pa coming up the slope, except he was wearing overalls, but a new suit of clothes, and I thought he must have been to town and bought a new suit. Was you dreaming? Mr. Pendergast said. Ross seen him too. Hank said, if it was a dream, we were both dreaming it. We watched Pa walk across the pasture, and when he got close enough to speak, I was going to say, how come you have a new suit? But just when I opened my mouth, he was gone. Where did he go? I said. He just disappeared, Hank said. Both Ross and me had seen him, and he just vanished in the evening air. Are you never seen him again? Mr. Pendergast said. We looked around all over the place, he said, and after a few minutes we seen Pa coming across the pasture again, except this time he was wearing his overalls and his old black hat and carrying the sack of corn on his shoulder. And he didn't know nothing about the suit of clothes, I said. We asked him about the suit, and he thought we were just fooling him, he said. And you never did explain it, Mr. Pendergast said. We never could figure it out, Hank said. But a few weeks later, Pa died all of a sudden. It was important, but we didn't know how to keep it. The Lord sent us a warning, Ma said. We ain't listening. There was a portent before Pa died, Hank said, and one after. What do you mean after? Mr. Pendergast said. Uncle Kevin seen Pa after he died, Hank said. How could he seen him? Mr. Pendergast said. After Pa was dead and buried, Uncle Kevin seen him in church at Saturday service, sitting in his usual seat. Hank said. He was sitting in the amen corner, and he was singing like he always did. Did they spoke to him? Mr. Pendergast said. After the service, he was gone. Hank said, except Uncle Kevin seen him there the next Sunday and the next. But after 3 Sundays, he didn't see him again. It was a sign, Mr. Richard said. A sign of what? Mr. Pendergast said. A sign of how much he hated to leave us, even to be with the Lord. Ma said. It was a sign he will always be watching over us. Ma took her handkerchief out of her sleeves and dabbed at her eye. Then she replaced the handkerchief and began to butter another biscuit. I think the dead are watching us all the time, Mr. Pendergast said. Of course they are, Mel Richard said. That's why we should be careful what we do and what we say. They are with the Lord and watching over us. At least some are with the Lord. We don't know a tenth of what there is to know, Mr. Pendergast said. Why we don't even know a sixth. The kitchen was so hot I had to go outside. I went out to the back porch to get the pie I'd put there to cool. Soon as I opened the door, I felt the cold wind. It was good to get out of the kitchen, but I hurried back in with the apple pie and took off the lid. That wind has ice in it, Ma Richard said. If it comes a freeze, we should kill the hog. Mr. Pendergast said. It would have to be a Saturday for me to help, Meg said. You help me butcher the hog. I will split the meat with you, Mr. Pendergast said. I will help you out, Hank said. And Julie can too. He sounded just like Papa and Mama back at home. If there was heavy work, it just naturally fell to me. But we sure needed the meat. I heard myself say.